In this video, I'd like to demonstrate the basic uses of the Oxy Acetylene Torch here. Now, we have a lot of tanks, but we only have one set that have the regulators on them. And the regulators are the things that have the knobs and dials to regulate the gas. That's why they're called regulators. So I'm going to show you how to use those. And I'm going to show you how to use the two different setups that we have for the Oxy Acetylene Torch to either heat up and bend metal or to cut it. Now you'll notice that I'm wearing a smock in addition to my leather apron today, and that's because when you cut metal, you cut steel with an Oxy Acetylene torch, it throws these little hot blobs of metal off called slag, and those hurt. If you get hit with one of those, it's kind of like getting burned with a cigarette, so you want to stay away from those. So it's a good idea to wear long sleeves. I'm also going to wear the heavy-duty welding gloves, which are kept in the toolbox down here in the shop, and I'm going to end up wearing this face shield that is darkened to minimize the glare from the torch. So let me show you how to set this up, to dial in the regulators for the right use, and then how to cut and bend steel. So what you're looking at here is the regulator for the acetylene tank. It says acetylene right on it, right there. You also know that it's the acetylene tank because it has the red hose going to it. These tanks are typically color-coded. Acetylene is always in a brown or a red tank. Oxygen is always in a green tank. You always want to turn on the acetylene first, and then the oxygen, and then in reverse order when you're shutting down. Now, to get this set up to use the tank, the first thing I'm going to do is turn the tank on. Right now, it's off, right? It's all the way closed. And it even says open and close on the dial if you get confused. So it's all the way closed right now. I'm going to turn it on. I don't need to unscrew that all the way. As soon as it's loose, it's on, okay? You're not going to see any change in these dials yet though, and that's because of this. This is actually the regulator. This is very loose right now, which means it's not putting any pressure into the line. I'm going to turn this dial, and you'll see this needle start to move. For cutting, I want that needle to be up around 5. So as I turn this in, that needle starts to move, and I'm going to turn it until it gets up around 5, maybe a little bit higher, and then I'm going to stop. Now my acetylene is going to the torch, and I'm going to make sure that the torch is all closed up. I'm good. Now I can set my oxygen tank. This is the regulator for the oxygen tank, and I'm going to go through the same process. First, I'm going to open the valve. All right. Just a little quarter turn, it's open, that's enough. Now, the regulator is loose and my dial is at 0. This dial, in case you're wondering, just tells you how much is in the tank. This has nothing to do with working, this is just telling you there is gas in the tank, there's about that much pressure. Now, when we adjust the regulators for what we're doing here in the shop, we read the numbers on the inside, okay? So, I set my acetylene at 5, according to the numbers on the inside of the dial. For cutting with oxygen, I'm going to set this to about 20. So you can see the 30 mark there. So it's 10, 20, 30. So I'm going to go up to that second bigger tick mark. So there we go. I'm at about 20. Now I can try out my torch and see if I can get a good flame. So you're probably hearing a lot of white noise in the background. That is the 2 exhaust fans. We have to turn those on when we do metal work, or else we'll set off the fire alarm and they'll have to clear out the building. Now, this is the cutting torch, all right? It is different from the brazing torch in that it has this paddle. What you want to do first is you want to set up your flame without using that, all right? To do that, you're going to use these 2 knobs. Now again, remember, these are color-coded. Acetylene, oxygen, right? The acetylene is red, the oxygen is green. We're going to start by lighting the acetylene. Now the way that we do that is we have our flint striker, and these are just like a little piece of flint against a rough piece of metal on the inside, and all you do is squeeze it with your thumb, like that. I'm going to get the gas flowing first. So that means I'm going to turn the acetylene knob here that corresponds with the red hose. So I'm going to open that up a little bit, not a lot, again it's just not even a quarter turn, and then I'm going to light it. Now that usually scares the crap out of everyone. It's nothing to be afraid of, it's just a little fire. Now I'm going to turn on the oxygen, which is the green knob. Now if I turn it too fast, okay, so there's two knobs for the oxygen. There's this one down here, and there's the one up here by the paddle. As I turn this on, you'll see the flame change. Ah, isn't that pretty? Now, what you want to do is get it nice and short. So you want that blue cone to be right up by the tip, if you can see that. This is where you're going to want your face shield. See how I'm getting that nice blue cone? Let me see if I can put it through the face shield to show you. So this is the face shield, so this is what it's going to look like for you through the shield. So now you might be able to see that cone a little better. Now, when I push that paddle, it forces a little bit of oxygen, a little bit extra oxygen through the tip. Now what you have to do if you want to cut with a torch is you have to preheat. So you're going to preheat with this flame, and then once you see that metal start to melt, you push this little paddle here, and that forces a little bit of extra air through, and you're able to cut. I'll show you. Okay, so I have my workpiece, and what I'm going to do is just I'm going to cut this long edge in half, because that would be something that would be difficult to do on another saw. I could do it on the bandsaw, but I'm going to show you how this cuts. And all I'm going to do is wedge it in here. Similar to using some of the saws, setup is everything when you're working in metal. So you have to get everything set up nice and stable before you start working. Now I've got my torch, I've got a good flame. When I push the handle, I get my little extra bit of air. Now let's go ahead and see if I can cut this. The first thing I have to do is preheat. Once that gets red hot and I see it start to bubble, I'm going to push the paddle and I should be able to cut right through it. That's all there is to it. Now it's a pretty sloppy cut, and it's really hot right now, so I would not want to touch it. Now to turn this torch off, all right, the first thing I'm going to do is turn off the oxygen. You always turn off the oxygen first. So I would turn that off here, and then it'll go back to being that scary orange flame, and then I would turn off the acetylene here. And then the last thing I would do is shut off the other oxygen valve. Now the torch is safe. A couple of things that can happen when you're using a torch like this. You can have what's called a flashback. Let me light the torch again and I'll show you what I mean. So there's the acetylene, there's the oxygen mixing in. So I get my nice short flame. I think I need a little more acetylene in there. That's a good flame. Now, if I get this tip too close to the metal, or if my metal's dirty, like right now it's kind of got carbon on it, it may snap back. And what'll happen is it'll make a loud crack, and then it'll blow the flame out. It didn't really do it. It's the kind of thing that only happens when you don't want it to. Well, if it happens to you, you'll know it. You'll hear a loud crack and the flame will just go out. And in that case, stop, turn all the knobs off, so that the gas isn't coming out anymore. Get your striker and start all over again. Not a big deal. And there are what's called flashback protectors on the regulators so that nothing can happen. It's not dangerous when that happens. It's not going to blow the tanks up or anything like that. I turned off the vent fan for a moment so that I can show you what I do when I switch out these tips. And I do this just to illustrate the difference. I would never ask you to do this change out. I would do it. Never change out any of the tips on the torch or the regulators on the gas bottles. Allow me to do that. But I want to show you the difference. This is the cutting tip, which we just used. This is a brazing tip. They're very different. If you look closely, the cutting tip has more than one hole in the end, and that's to give you a bigger flame so that you can preheat faster and then let out more oxygen to cut. The brazing tip has just one little hole, and you don't really use the paddle as much when you're doing that. So to change this out, all I have to do is take a pair of my channel lock pliers, grip right there, and I loosen that. Now, both of these knobs are off all the way. There's no gas coming out, so it's totally safe to switch this tip out. You'll notice a little bit of white tape on there. That's Teflon tape. It's used in plumbing and gas work, and it just helps create a stable seal so that gas doesn't leak out. Every once in a while, you'll get a little gas leak. I've been working before with this kind of torch and looked down to see a little flame shooting out there between the handle and the tip, or shooting out even out of the regulator. And it's a scary moment, but it's not anything that's going to cause an explosion. Okay, so get my tip on there. I'm going to tighten this back up. Now this tip swivels, which is sort of funny, but that can be handy depending on how you want to orient this when you're holding it. If you prefer to hold it like that, then you can swivel the end around. The lighting process is the same. And I'll turn the fans back on and I'll show you. So once again, you're going to start with the acetylene, which is the red. So I'm going to turn that knob. I get my nice bright orange flame, and now I'm going to add in the oxygen. Something I forgot. When you use the brazing tip, you lower the pressure in the regulators. So I have this set to 5 for oxygen, for acetylene, and 20 for oxygen. I'm going to lower that down. So we're going to change the mix for this because it's still set to cutting. So over on my regulators, something I need to do before I start using the brazing tip is I need to change the mix. Right now I have the oxygen set at 20, and that's because I want to use that paddle to blow the slag out of the cut. I don't need it that high anymore because I'm not cutting, so I'm going to lower it. So all I have to do is lower it. Right now it's on 20, and I want it down around 8. So I'm going to twist this until I see that needle start to move, and you can see it going down. And I'm going to put it just below that first mark. Now here's the funny thing about this. There's pressure in the line. So I can loosen this all the way up and it's still registering at over 10. But watch what happens. As soon as I open this oxygen valve, it drops off. So now I've bled the line, there's no gas in the line, and now I can tighten this up again until it goes right about to where I want, which is right before that first tick mark. I also have to reset the acetylene. For brazing with acetylene, you want a little bit higher mix of acetylene. You actually want them to be more even. So whereas we were using the cutting torch at 5 acetylene and 20 oxygen, now we're going to be at about 8 and 8. So I'm going to turn this up a little bit from 5 to up around 8. Now since I'm turning that up, I don't need to bleed the line like I did for the oxygen, because it just increases the pressure and you see it. And by the way, all of these numbers are on a poster on the wall in case you forget. I frequently do. Okay, so now I'm going to show you something fun you can do with the brazing torch. I have this 1/4-inch rod here, and I'm going to clamp it in the vise so that it can't go anywhere. And I'm going to bend this into a funky shape. Now, right now, there's nobody in the shop, so I have this table over against the wall. But if there were people in here, what I might do is wheel this over behind the flash screen. But I want to use this vise. Now, I'm going to want to bend this rod, but I'm going to have the torch in my hand, and I'm not going to want to have to fumble with a pair of pliers. So before I even start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these vise grips. I'm going to clamp these to the end. Remember, vise grips, because they have a vise, right? I'm going to clamp this to the end. So right now I can't squeeze that all the way closed, so I'll loosen this a little until I can. Now it's too loose. Now I can just tighten it a little bit and it should clamp on there. Yeah. Now I'm going to heat this up with the brazing torch, and once it's nice and hot, I can just twist that and I can put a fun bend on it. Let me show you. So I've got my face shield right here that I'm going to put on. I've got my smock on, and I've got my fancy gloves, and I'm ready to light my torch. The vent fans are running, as you can hear. Lighting this torch is the same as lighting the cutting torch. You start with the acetylene, and then you turn the oxygen on. So turn that on first, and then light it. Now I'm going to add the acetylene into the mix. And what I want is a nice, even flame. Now see how that gets red hot? Now, it's a lot easier to bend. Turning off the torch is the same whether it's cutting or brazing. Turn off the oxygen first, then the acetylene. I'll show you another fun thing you can do here. I'm going to heat the other end up. I'm going to heat this tip up. Now this is still really hot, so I don't want to touch it. That's the other reason I've clamped the vise grips to it. So now I'm going to lock this in the vise. I'm going to heat this end up, and then as soon as it's hot, I'm going to take it over to the anvil, and I'm going to hit it with a hammer, and I'm going to flatten it. Now, that's not exactly pretty, but it's a start. I could do a lot with that. That gets very flat, and I could heat it again, and I could hit it again. I could take it to the grinder, and I could grind this into a regular shape. I could take it to the metal drill press and drill a hole in the end and do something with this. You can make hardware for dressers or boxes or anything you want. You can make a hinge. I could curl that around. All of that is just patience, heating it up with the torch, taking it over the anvil, hitting it with a little 3-pound maul until you get what you want. You can flatten out metal cold, but it doesn't flatten out nearly as well as it would if you heated it up like I just did. So that is the most rudimentary explanation of how to use the cutting and brazing torch. You can also use that brazing torch to weld. It's called brazing when it's 2 different kinds of metals. If it's the same kind of metal, 2 pieces of steel, then it's just called welding. I'll demo that in the welding video separately. It's a little bit different process, and you use a fill rod. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, if I've been using the torch, is I'm going to bleed the lines, turn off the tanks, and I'm going to wind up the hose around the cart, nice and neat, just like I would with any other tool. To bleed the lines on the Oxy Acetylene Torch, all you have to do is first loosen the regulator. This is already set up. I had it set. I'm going to loosen it up until I feel a little play. Don't loosen it too much, although if you do, all that happens is it falls out. And that is not the end of the world as long as you don't lose that. This is the thing, this little thing in here is what pushes in on the valve to let the gas into the hose. So when it's all the way out like this, it just means that the valve is totally closed. So I'm going to loosen both regulators completely until I feel them rattle a little bit. Like that. Then I'm going to close the tanks. And again, if you forget, look right on the top. It says open and close. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bleed the lines. And the way that I do that is I turn on each valve separately and I watch the needle and it'll drop. Once I've done that, I know that there's no gas running through the lines and there's no pressure on the regulator. If you forget to do this, it's not the end of the world. It's not like the building's going to blow up. But what it means is that there's pressure in the regulator that doesn't need to be there because you're not working. And if you leave pressure in the regulator for too long, then eventually these will wear out, and we're just trying to prolong their life. It also means that if there's pressure in the regulator, there is gas coming to this tip. And if somebody picked it up and didn't realize and turned it on, it would possibly cause a fire. So always remember to do that. It's very important. If you forget, tell me, and I will do it. Even if you have to text me and say, oh my gosh, I forgot to bleed the lines and close the valves. When you're all done, like I said, wrap up the hose around the cart, and you're good to go.